Hey, what's up, world? It's Carpo, or Josh, if you will. I'm sitting at work, waiting to begin my day, and too many thoughts running through my head, especially one about history, and I thought I would share it with y'all. When I was growing up, I remember when I was in school, and I made it through my senior year, but I didn't actually graduate because I was short of credits. But I remember during that entire time, I picked up on a lot of it. I was pretty good at the tests, but I never did my homework. I usually had a 1.5 grade point average, like a D if I was lucky, because I refused to do any homework. I don't think I ever did homework my entire school career. I mean, maybe a few hours when I was younger. Even at that age, I was very opposed to the system as it was, infringing upon my freedom outside of school. So I had this thought about excuse me. I had this thought going through my head about history, and I remember when I was in school, they'd tell us that old line. What's the most famous line you can think of that tells us why we need to know history? Think about it for a second. I'm sure most of you thought of the one that says, those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. And it's funny because I think today I've really been thinking about this a lot, very deeply, not just on the surface of history. What is history? But I've been learning about Herodotus, who was the father of history, if you will. You could call it his story, but history is nothing more than a story of the past. And when in the time of Herodotus, there was no history yet. In the time of the Greeks, they hadn't quite pulled history as a subject yet. It was most of the histories weren't very well written, if they were written at all, and at that point what they had were myths and legends. And we're all familiar with myths and legends. Well, myths and legends were basically the history of the people in our history, and that's what they used to see the world around them, to understand it, was archetypes, symbols, whether it be these entities that are human snakes, or it be a symbol of a mountain with a sun. They had different symbols for things that they knew they could convey to different cultures. Now, history in itself is interesting, learning about why things happened and when things happened. I don't think the when is so important as the why. The reason being, this is why a lot of philosophers have been really interested in history, but not cared about dates at all. Most philosophers don't really care about specific dates. Knowing a timeline or a period is nice, but having a specific date is irrelevant. The idea being that mankind does not change, and this is why our governmental structure has not changed. And when I heard somebody point that out, not in those words, but that really hit me, because I realized that we're expecting our government to change to the wills of the future. We're saying we need to move forward, we need to move on, and the problem is that nobody's saying move forward with what. In other words, we're tired of the game we're playing, but we don't have any game to replace it. And we can't leave the game until the game is done. Whatever game we've created has a lot depending on it. In other words, we can't just throw in the towel and just go back to living on the land. We have way too much of an infrastructure that would crumble. People would die. There's not enough food. We need the infrastructure. We need the oil. We need all these things that we have in order to feed people. Most of us know that there's going to have to be some heartache before there's anything or any resolution on this. In other words, a lot of people are going to have to die before we can go back to living in a more earthly manner, if you will. But I was listening to a story. I think it was the story that the 300 was based on. The battle between Athens and Sparta. Sparta had, I can't remember the name of the particular ruler at that time. He was the commander of the army of Athens, the military. And yeah, they had a navy too. I mean, they had professional navy men who would go out and they would ride their boats along and shear the oars, shear the paddles off of the other boats, you know. And those were their weapons. Those were their weapons of mass destruction. That's what they had. And so when we look back on them and their weapons, we think, oh, look at them and their boats and their bows and arrows. These were serious wars. These were big wars. And they were fought with hundreds of thousands of men. And a lot of people died. You remember the movie The 300? Well, that was a flawed history. There was a lot more than 300. The 300 were just the Spartan, you know, top dogs. You know, there were thousands of innocents who died in that war that fought alongside the 300. So it's funny that I'm even talking about this, because this whole subject just bothered. It's just a total annoyance to me in history, Greek history, Roman history. I didn't really care. And now I understand what they were trying to tell me for so long, and I want to speak this to convey it to people who are maybe younger, maybe the younger generation who are, maybe you're in your, you know, teens or 20s and you know, you're not interested in history. Learn it now, because I want to point out one particular case in where it's really made me understand where we're coming from today as a society. And that's why I brought up Athens and Sparta. In Sparta, during the time when they were, it was the time of the Peloponnesian War, and they wanted to invade Persia in order to prevent Persia from invading them, I believe. It was preventative strike, right? And this is exactly what we do today, the same thing. Oh, a surgical strike to prevent future problems, you know, preemptive strike. So what the military said, what the military leaders said was, okay, people, if there are other places, this is not the Peloponnesian anymore, but the war with, Athens wanted to ride their boats up to Sicily, and they wanted to take over Italy. And the Italians closed their harbor and said, no, you can't come in. And they didn't know what to do. So the commander said, should we leave? And the commander says, no. Because if we leave, then we'll appear weak to the world. So we have to follow through on what we've done. And, I mean, all of this mirrors exactly what's going on in the world today with our military. And this is why I'm bringing this up, is every military lie or, you know, all this has happened in the past. This is all repeated history. So by knowing the history, then you can pick out the things when people are lying to you or when you're not being told the whole truth. They were told if they didn't invade, they told their people if they didn't invade first, preemptively, then they were going to be invaded, because Syracuse was building this huge army to attack them. The truth was there was no army, but they used the ignorance of the people combined with the lies that they could tell to get people in fear, and use that to gain public support for the war, because we're talking about a democracy here. And you know, that's another thing to learn, democracy, why democracy fails. It's a constant failure. It's been repeated over and over and over, and it's repeated, and we continue on with it. It's because it's what we know. But if you look at the wars of today, and you look at history, you can make a very, very, you can draw a line between them. I mean, they are identical. It's something people need to know about, and that's all I'm saying. That's why his history is so important, and that's why I think that each one of us should take a little bit of time to learn about the things that have been done in the past to prevent them from the future. But as people don't change generally, or haven't yet, as a whole, then our governments aren't likely to change either. So, namaste.